When I was 19 years old, I watched a 3-meter-tall creature disappear before my eyes. Not run, not hide, simply cease to exist, as if someone had erased its image from reality. My name is Dr. Helena Frost. I was an emeritus professor of quantum physics at MIT for 37 years, and I've spent the last 58 years of my life documenting something that science refuses to admit. Sasquatch aren't hiding in the forests of North America. They're shifting dimensions. And in 2024, I discovered they're abandoning our world permanently, as if they know something about Earth's future that we don't yet comprehend. If you've made it this far, thank you. There's more I need to tell you. If this story matters to you, if you believe certain truths cannot be buried, subscribe to the channel. Stay with me until the end, because what I'm about to reveal isn't just about them, it's about us. It was October 1967. I was 19 years old, and in my second year of physics at the University of Washington. My boyfriend at the time, a biology student named Mark, had convinced me to spend the weekend camping in Olympic National Park. I wasn't the adventurous type. I preferred laboratories to forests, but he insisted, said I needed to see the real world beyond equations. On the afternoon of the second day, we decided to hike to a more isolated area, off the marked trails. The weather was strange, an unusual warmth for October, humid and heavy, the kind of air that seems to press against your skin. The trees were too silent, no birds, no insect sounds. Mark commented on it, but I said it was normal. It wasn't. Around 5 in the afternoon, we stopped in a small clearing to rest. That's when I felt the change. The temperature plummeted, not gradually, suddenly, like someone had opened a door to a giant freezer. My breath turned to mist. Mark looked at me confused, but before we could speak, we heard the sound. Footsteps, heavy, slow, deliberate. I turned my head and saw it. The creature stood about 20 meters from us, motionless at the edge of the clearing, between 2 enormous sequoias. It was a male. I knew immediately from the structure, the posture, at least 3 meters tall, covered in reddish-brown fur that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The shoulders were as wide as barn doors. But what froze me wasn't the size. It was the face. It was looking at us, not with animal curiosity, with recognition, as if evaluating whether we were a threat or not. The eyes were dark, deep, intelligent, too human to belong to an animal, too primitive to belong to a man. Mark grabbed my arm, whispered, "Don't move." But the creature showed no aggression. It just stood there, watching, for maybe 15 seconds. Then something changed. The air around it began to ripple, like heat mirages on asphalt on summer days. But it was cold, freezing. My teeth started chattering. I felt a high-pitched ringing in my ears, like amplified radio interference. And then it disappeared. Didn't run, didn't turn. Simply ceased to be there, as if its image had been dissolved frame by frame, until only the forest behind it remained. The space where it had stood became empty. No sound, no movement, just absence. Mark screamed. I couldn't move. I stood there, trembling, staring at the empty space where the creature had been. The temperature gradually returned to normal, as if someone was turning up an invisible thermostat. The birds began singing again. The forest breathed once more. We ran back to camp. Mark wanted to call the forest rangers. I said no, said nobody would believe us. He got furious, accused me of being in shock, of denying what we'd seen. But I wasn't denying. I was trying to understand. That night, alone in the tent while Mark slept, I wrote everything down in my physics notebook, described the temperature drop, the distortion of the air, the sensation of pressure in my ears, the instantaneous disappearance, and I wrote a question that would haunt me for the next 5 decades. If it wasn't hiding, where did it go? We broke up 3 weeks later. Mark said I was obsessed. He wasn't wrong, but it wasn't obsession, it was responsibility. I had witnessed something that defied everything physics knew about matter, light and reality, and if nobody was going to investigate, I would. I spent the next 10 years building my academic career while secretly collecting reports. I interviewed forest rangers, fishermen, hunters, tourists, anyone who claimed to have seen a Sasquatch. I discarded 90% of the cases. People lie. People see what they want to see. But there was a small, consistent subset that interested me. Reports of instantaneous disappearances. By 1977, I had catalogued 34 documented cases where witnesses described a Sasquatch vanishing instead of fleeing. All shared the same elements: atmospheric distortion, sudden temperature drop, sensation of pressure or buzzing. They weren't delusions. They were consistent measurements of a real phenomenon. I got married in 1979, divorced in 1982. He said I spent more time in the forests than at home. He was right. My career at MIT thrived. I published papers on quantum mechanics, field theory, nonlinear dynamics. But my real research happened in the mountains of the Pacific Northwest, where nobody from academia was looking. In 1983, I had my first major breakthrough. I was camping alone near Mount Rainier, equipped with infrared thermometers I had borrowed from the lab. They were sensitive enough to detect variations of 1 degree Celsius at 50 meters. At dawn on the third day at 4:17 a.m., the alarms went off. Ambient temperature 8 degrees C. 3 seconds later, 3 degrees C. 11 degrees in 3 seconds. Physically impossible without an external energy source. I jumped from the tent with my camera. I saw nothing. But the data was there, recorded, quantified, real. I tried to publish, sent the paper anonymously to 3 scientific journals. It was rejected with brutal comments. Flawed methodology. Lack of experimental control. Unfounded conclusions. One reviewer wrote, "This is not science, it's fiction disguised as data." That was the first time I realized I would never be accepted. It didn't matter how much data I collected. It didn't matter how rigorous my methodology was. Because I was studying something that shouldn't exist, so I stopped trying to convince others and started documenting only for myself. During the 1990s, I mapped 214 Sasquatch sightings in the Pacific Northwest. Of those, 73 included reports of instantaneous disappearance. I started noticing geographic patterns. The disappearances occurred in specific areas, isolated valleys, mountain slopes, edges of glacial lakes. It wasn't random. In 1994, I made another discovery. During a sighting documented by a forest ranger in Oregon, all electronic devices within a 50-meter radius failed simultaneously. Radios, cameras, even digital watches stopped. The electromagnetic interference was so strong it burned the internal circuits. I repeated the experiment, took electromagnetic measurement equipment to high-incidence areas, recorded massive spikes, magnetic field peaks that didn't correspond to any known natural source. It was as if something was generating a localized, temporary, but extremely powerful electromagnetic pulse. I lost 3 cameras, 2 audio recorders, a laptop where the hard drive was permanently magnetized, erasing 5 years of research. I learned to back up everything on paper, returned to notebooks, to hand-drawn maps, to 19th century science applied to a 21st century phenomenon. My theory began to form. Sasquatch didn't disappear because they moved quickly. They disappeared because they left the visible spectrum of light. They weren't fleeing through the forest. They were fleeing through reality. But that implied something quantum physics only suggested theoretically, the existence of parallel dimensions or adjacent planes of existence. What if Sasquatch had evolved, or been modified, to access these dimensions? What if the thin spots I was mapping were natural portals, places where the membrane between realities was permeable? It sounded like science fiction, but the data didn't lie. In 2003, I started working with a retired NASA physicist named Dr. Amit Kapoor. He had read about my research in an obscure parapsychology journal and contacted me. Unlike the others, he didn't laugh. He listened. Amit had access to equipment I could never afford. Ultra-sensitive gravitational meters, portable mass spectrometers, devices that could detect micro-variations in the fabric of space-time. He was convinced that if Sasquatch were jumping between dimensions, they would leave measurable physical signatures. We spent the next 12 years collecting data. We mapped 22 high-incidence locations. In all of them, Amit detected gravitational anomalies. Not large, micro-variations, fluctuations of 0.0003 G, but consistent, replicable, always in the same locations where witnesses had reported disappearances. He called them zones of low-dimensional tension. I called them portals. In 2015, we finally got what I needed, a phantom high-speed camera capable of recording 120,000 frames per second. Amit had a friend at a special effects studio in Los Angeles who loaned us the equipment for 2 weeks. We set up camp in Olympic National Forest, the same park where I'd seen my first creature 48 years before. I was 67. Amit was 72. 2 old scientists chasing ghosts in the forest. We waited 11 days. On the morning of the 12th day, At 6:34 a.m. it happened. A young male emerged from the morning mist. 2.5 meters, dark brown fur, upright walk but slightly leaning forward. He stopped 30 meters from us, sniffed the air, looked at us. Amit pressed the record button. The creature remained there for maybe 20 seconds. Then it started. The atmospheric distortion, the temperature drop, the ringing in the ears. And I saw it. In 0.03 seconds, 30 milliseconds, the creature's molecular structure literally slid out of the visible spectrum, didn't disappear like smoke. Changed frequency, like tuning a radio between stations. There was one moment, a single frame, where it was simultaneously solid and translucent, where I could see through it, but it was still there. And then, nothing. Amit and I watched the recording 47 times that night, frame by frame, millisecond by millisecond. There was no trick, no conventional explanation. The creature didn't run, didn't hide, changed state, like water turning to vapor, but instantaneous. I cried alone in the cabin that night, not from fear, from relief, because finally, after 48 years, I had proof, not of what they were, but of what they did. Amit died 6 months later. Heart attack. He never saw the research completed. But before he died, he made me promise one thing. Helena, when you publish this, don't let them say it was delusion. It was science. It always was science. I promised, but it would take 9 more years before I had the courage to keep that promise. Between 2016 and 2023, I documented 412 more cases. The frequency was increasing, not the sightings. Those were decreasing, but the disappearances. In 1990, I recorded an average of 8 instantaneous disappearances per year. In 2020, there were 27. In 2023, 73. The Sasquatch weren't reproducing less. They were leaving. I started mapping the data temporally. The pattern was undeniable. The visible population was shrinking, while dimensional jump events were skyrocketing. It was like watching a migration, not through the forest, through reality. And then I realized something terrifying. They knew. There was no other explanation. Species don't abandon their habitats without reason. Not en masse. Not in coordination. The only logical explanation was that Sasquatch perceived something we hadn't yet perceived. An environmental change, a future threat. Something that made them choose to leave permanently rather than remain. What do they know about Earth that we don't? In April 2024, at 76 years old, I decided to return to Olympic National Park one last time, not to collect data, but to witness. I set up camp in the exact location where in 1967 I had seen my first creature. The clearing was smaller, the trees had grown, taken space, but the air had the same quality, that feeling of being between worlds. I spent 3 weeks alone in the forest, unhurried, without expectations, just observing. At dawn on the 19th day, I heard the footsteps. She emerged from the mist like a material ghost, female, 2.5 meters, graying fur at the edges, sign of age, and beside her a juvenile, no more than 1.5 meters, large, curious eyes. They stopped 15 meters from me. The female looked directly at me. There was no fear in her eyes, no anger. There was recognition, as if she knew exactly who I was, what I'd done, all those decades documenting her species, and then something I'll never forget. She tilted her head, slightly, like a farewell. The juvenile mimicked her. The distortion began. The air rippled. The temperature dropped. The buzzing filled my ears like a chorus of electronic voices, and in 0.03 seconds, both slid out of the visible world. I stood there, alone, looking at the empty space where they had been. And I cried for the second time in 58 years, not because they were gone, but because I understood they would never return. I went home and started compiling everything. 847 documented cases, 58 years of data, photographs, recordings, gravitational measurements, spectrographic analyses, testimonies from 214 different witnesses, maps detailing the 22 thin spots where the dimensional membrane was most permeable. The final report was 1,247 pages. I sent it to 14 scientific institutions: MIT, Caltech, Stanford, Princeton, Harvard, NASA, NOAA, Smithsonian Institution, American Physical Society, Royal Society of London, National Science Foundation, European Organization for Nuclear Research, University of Tokyo, University of Cambridge, None responded. Well, one responded. MIT, where I taught for 37 years, sent a 2-line letter. Dr. Frost, we regret to inform you that the material submitted does not meet peer-reviewed research criteria. We suggest seeking alternative publication channels. Alternative channels. I laughed alone for 5 minutes. I wasn't angry. I wasn't disappointed. I was, free, because I finally understood something that took 58 years to learn. Truth doesn't need institutional validation to be true. It exists independently of being accepted, and my work was never to convince academia. It was to document what I saw, preserve the testimony, leave the record. If nobody believes now, maybe they'll believe in 50 years, or 100, or never. It doesn't matter anymore. In October 2024, I published the complete report online, a simple website, free PDF download, all 1,247 pages, all photographs, all videos, all raw data. Title: Documentation of Dimensional Displacement in Gigantopithecus cognatus, a 58-year longitudinal study, 1967-2024. I didn't expect anyone to read it, but they did. In 6 weeks, the site received 2,400,000 visits. Journalists contacted me. Podcasts invited me. Documentarians wanted to buy the rights. But what mattered to me was a single email. Sender: Dr. Kenji Matsuda, University of Tokyo, Department of Theoretical Physics. Subject: The gravitational anomalies are spreading. I opened the email with trembling hands. Dr. Frost, my name is Kenji Matsuda. I'm a professor of applied quantum physics at the University of Tokyo. I've read your report 3 times. I need to tell you something I haven't shared publicly because, until reading your work, I thought I was alone. For the past 7 years, my team has been detecting gravitational anomalies identical to those you described, not just in Japan, globally. Tibet, Patagonia, Siberia, Scotland, Borneo, Tanzania. Remote places where, historically, there are reports of unidentified humanoid creatures. The gravitational variations are increasing in frequency and intensity. In 2017, we detected one anomaly every 3 months. In 2024, we detect one every 17 hours. Something is happening to the fabric of space-time. We don't know what, but your work may be the key. Can we talk? Sincerely, Dr. Kenji Matsuda, I replied immediately. We spoke via video conference 3 days later. Kenji was 52, graying hair, tired eyes of someone who had seen things he couldn't explain. He showed me the data, charts, maps, gravitational measurements collected by seismic stations around the world. It was identical to what Amit and I had documented, but multiplied, global, accelerated. Dr. Frost, Kenji said, leaning toward the camera, what you're documenting isn't just creatures shifting dimensions. These are portals opening, and the frequency is increasing exponentially. If this rate continues, soon he paused, in 18 months we'll have a gravitational anomaly every minute, somewhere on the planet. What does that mean? I asked, though I already knew the answer. It means the barrier between dimensions is weakening, globally. And if the Sasquatch perceived this before us and are abandoning this dimension, he swallowed hard. Maybe they're right. We spent the next 3 months exchanging data. Kenji had resources I never had. Satellites, sensor networks, machine learning algorithms. He overlaid my documented disappearance points with the gravitational anomaly locations his team had detected. 94.7% match. It wasn't coincidence. It was cause and effect. In January 2025, Kenji flew to Seattle. We met in person for the first time at a cafe near the university. He seemed smaller than on screen, but his eyes had the same intensity. Helena, he said, using my first name for the first time, we need to publish this together, not as theory, as warning. Nobody will believe it, I said. Maybe not, but they need to know. We spent 2 weeks preparing the paper. It wasn't just about Sasquatch. It was about dimensional collapse, about how the structure of reality was becoming permeable, about how entire species, not just mythical creatures, but perhaps even life forms we don't perceive, were migrating to other dimensions, and about what that meant for humanity. We submitted the paper to 5 high-impact scientific journals: Nature, Science, Physical Review Letters, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, the Astrophysical Journal, all rejected. But this time, one of the reviewers left an unofficial comment in the system. Kenji sent me a screenshot. This work is methodologically sound and the data is disturbing, but publishing something suggesting imminent dimensional collapse would cause mass panic. We cannot validate this without additional evidence that, frankly, I don't know how to obtain, I'm sorry. So it wasn't a question of science, it was a question of fear. We published on RCore, a scientific preprint repository where anyone can submit research before peer review. In 72 hours, the paper was downloaded 890,000 times. Comments from physicists worldwide started appearing, some supportive, many skeptical, but nobody could refute the data. The media started covering it, not as serious science, but as conspiracy theory with data. I was called the Bigfoot Physicist. Kenji was accused of tarnishing his reputation. But something changed. Scientists started contacting me privately. Physicists, biologists, astrophysicists. People with impeccable credentials who had detected similar anomalies but were afraid to speak publicly. One was Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, astrophysicist at the European Southern Observatory in Chile. She sent me radio telescope data showing spatial shear events, moments where radio signals from distant stars were momentarily distorted, as if something was bending space between us and them. "It's happening," she wrote. "I don't know what it is, but it's accelerating." Another contact came from Dr. Mbeki Adeyemi, seismologist at the University of Nairobi, who detected non-seismic gravitational pulses in the mountains of Kenya, exactly in locations where local tribes reported sightings of creatures they call ngagi, the forest spirit. "I thought they were instrument errors," he admitted, "but after reading your work I reviewed everything. The pulses are real, and they're getting stronger. We were building a network, unofficial, unsanctioned, but real. Scientists around the world sharing data about something the official scientific community refused to acknowledge." And then, in March 2025, something changed. Two seismic monitoring stations, one in Japan and one in Chile, detected the same event simultaneously, a gravitational pulse of 0.001 G that lasted exactly 0.7 seconds. This shouldn't be possible. Gravitational waves from astrophysical sources take millions of years to reach us and are incredibly weak. This was local, instantaneous, and coordinated. Kenji called me at 3 in the morning. "Helena, it just happened again, France and Australia this time. Both detected identical pulses 0.003 seconds apart." 3-millisecond difference, I said, understanding immediately. "It's not simultaneity, it's propagation." "Exactly. As if something is opening in multiple locations." We didn't sleep that night, monitored stations around the world. At 4:17 a.m., another pulse. Norway and New Zealand. At 6:33 a.m., Canada and India. At 8:52 a.m., Brazil and Russia. The pattern was undeniable. Every 2 hours, two distant locations on the planet experienced synchronized gravitational anomalies, and the frequency was increasing. By April 2025, it was every hour. By May, every 30 minutes. Something was happening, something global, something we could no longer ignore. And then, on June 7th, 2025, at 14:22 GMT, all seismic stations worldwide detected the same event simultaneously. A gravitational pulse of 0.003 G that lasted 1.2 seconds and was felt on all continents at the same time. Physicists panicked. Seismologists couldn't explain it. Astronomers checked satellite data looking for meteorite impacts, solar flares, any conventional explanation. Nothing. The only explanation that fit the data was the one nobody wanted to accept. The dimensional barrier had been breached. Not locally, globally. And 20 minutes after the pulse, the reports began. A fisherman in Alaska saw a bear disappear instantly at the edge of a river. A forest ranger in Madagascar witnessed a group of lemurs vanish like smoke. A shepherd in the mountains of Tibet filmed 5 yaks dissolving in the air while grazing. It wasn't just Sasquatch, it was everything. The dimensional migration wasn't exclusive to one species. It was an exodus, and it was beginning. Governments started issuing statements. NASA released an official communication saying, "Minor gravitational anomalies were detected but pose no threat." European and Asian space agencies issued similar statements, but independent scientists, including our network, knew the truth. It wasn't minor, and it was getting worse. In July 2025, I documented my last Sasquatch sighting, Olympic National Forest, the same location where it all began 58 years before. It wasn't one creature, it was 12, females, males, juveniles, an entire family. They emerged from the mist in a line, walking slowly toward a clearing where Amit and I had detected one of the largest gravitational anomalies in 2018. They didn't hide from me, walked directly in my direction, stopped 10 meters away and looked at me. The lead male, a giant with silver fur and deep scars on his chest, took a step forward. His eyes studied me. There was something in that gaze that transcended language. It wasn't anger, it wasn't fear, it was farewell. And then he did something I'd never seen before. Extended his right hand, enormous with 5 clearly defined fingers, thick but trimmed nails, and touched the air in front of me, as if touching an invisible wall between us. I understood immediately. He wasn't saying goodbye to me. He was showing me the barrier, the membrane that separated our worlds, and telling me it was disappearing. Then he returned to the group, and all walked toward the center of the clearing. The distortion began, but this time it was different, slower, more visible, like watching an image being erased with a digital eraser. They didn't disappear in 0.03 seconds. It took almost 5 seconds, long enough for me to really see, the process. Their bodies became translucent, then ethereal, then non-existent, as if being pulled through a dimensional filter, layer by layer, until only empty air remained. I stayed there for 2 hours afterward, alone, silent. Mourning not for them, they chose to leave, but for us, because we stayed. I went home and wrote an addendum to my report, 15 pages documenting the last 3 months, the global gravitational pulses, the mass disappearance sightings, the accelerated dimensional migration, and a conclusion I never thought I'd write. The Sasquatch aren't fleeing from us, they're fleeing from what's coming. And if a species that survived for millions of years, that developed or inherited the ability to cross dimensions, is permanently abandoning this planet, then we have 2 possibilities. First, they know something about Earth's future that we haven't yet detected, an imminent environmental, magnetic, or dimensional change that will make this planet uninhabitable. Second, the dimensional barrier is collapsing not just at isolated points, but globally, and they're leaving before we lose control over our own reality. Either of these possibilities is catastrophic, and I don't know what's worse, that they know something we don't know, or that they know the same thing we're beginning to perceive, but have the ability to escape. I published the addendum online in August 2025. 3 days later, I received a call. Unknown number. I answered. Dr. Frost? Male voice. Formal. American. Yes. My name is not important. I work for a federal agency I also cannot name. I'm calling to inform you that your research is being monitored and that there are concerns about the public panic it may cause. I felt my blood freeze. I'm documenting science. We understand. But there's science the public isn't ready to process, especially when it involves events we can't control or fully explain. So, you know, I said, you know the Sasquatch are real. You know about the dimensional anomalies. Silence for 3 seconds, then, Dr. Frost, I'm neither confirming nor denying anything. I'm just suggesting it might be wise to consider the psychological impact of continuing to publish material, suggesting imminent dimensional collapse. Is that a threat? It's advice. Good afternoon, Doctor. He hung up. I didn't delete anything, didn't hide anything. If they wanted to silence me, they'd have to do more than anonymous phone calls. In September 2025, gravitational anomalies were occurring every 7 minutes. The network of scientists we built grew to 237 researchers in 54 countries. We were no longer fringe, we were a community, and we started documenting something new. It wasn't just animals disappearing, it was places. An entire village in Nepal, population of 43, was found empty one morning. No signs of struggle, no bodies, just empty houses and fires still burning. As if everyone had stood up simultaneously and crossed to another dimension. A research team in Antarctica, 6 scientists, disappeared from a station that was being monitored by cameras 24/7. The recordings showed everyone working normally. Then, in a single frame, the room was empty. No transition, no movement, just absence. This wasn't migration, it was dissolution. And then, on October 23, 2025, something happened that changed everything. I was at home in Seattle reviewing data when I felt it. Didn't see, didn't hear, felt a pressure in my chest, as if the air had become denser. The hair on my arms stood up. The light from the window seemed to tremble. not flicker, tremble. I looked at the clock, 3:44 p.m., and I realized the silence, absolute silence. No cars on the street, no birds, no wind sound, as if the entire world had held its breath. It lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then sound returned, gradually, like someone turning up the volume of the universe. I called Kenji. Did you feel it? Yes, Tokyo too. I was with 3 colleagues. We all felt it at the same time. We called others in the network. Chile, South Africa, Norway, Australia, Brazil, India. Everyone felt it. Exactly at 3:44 p.m. GMT, 10 seconds where the entire world went silent. Kenji analyzed the seismic data. All stations recorded the same, a gravitational pulse of 0. Saisuro 7G, 7 times stronger than the June event, that lasted exactly 9.8 seconds. Helena, he said, and for the first time I heard real fear in his voice. This wasn't a localized anomaly. It was global, synchronized. And the intensity, he paused. If this continues increasing at this rate, in 6 months we'll have events of 1G. That's equivalent to Earth's gravity. If the dimensional barrier collapses completely, he didn't need to finish. If the barrier collapses, there will be no migration. There will be fusion, 2 realities occupying the same space, and nobody knows what happens when that occurs. Today is November 12th, 2025. I'm writing this as a final addendum to my report. At 77 years old, I've documented 58 years of dimensional disappearances, 847 individual cases, 22 mapped portals, and now global events suggesting the structure of reality is dissolving. The Sasquatch left. Not all. There are still occasional reports, but most. They knew. They always knew. And now we know too. I don't know if this planet has 6 months, or 6 years, or 6 decades. I don't know if dimensional collapse is inevitable, or if there's something we can do to stabilize the barrier. But I know this. I've spent my entire life documenting the truth, even when nobody believed. And I'll continue until the end. Because truth is all we have. It's all that remains when the world around us starts to disappear. If you're reading this, as in any era, understand one thing. The Sasquatch weren't monsters. They weren't myths. They were survivors from a world older than ours. Beings who learned to cross between realities when a single reality was no longer sufficient. And perhaps in the end, they were trying to teach us, not with words, but with departure, showing that when the world fails, the only survival is crossing to another. I hope we're listening. Epilogue, Frequency, January 2026. The last message was transmitted on January 3rd, 2026 at 03:17 GMT. It came through all channels simultaneously, radio, television, internet, cell phones, as if someone, or something, had hacked every communication system on the planet at once. It wasn't words. It was a tone, low, pulsing, 783 Hz, the Schumann frequency, Earth's natural heartbeat. It lasted 42 seconds, and when it ended, silence. No seismic stations recorded anything. No satellites detected anomalies, but everyone felt it. Dr. Kenji Matsuda sent me an email 2 hours later. A single line, "Helena, I think it just began." I didn't reply, because there was nothing to say. I went to the window. Seattle was waking up. Cars on the street, people walking to work. Everything normal, everything ordinary, but the air was different, denser, as if it had weight. I looked at the sky. It was still there, blue, clear, real, for now. I returned to the computer and opened my report one last time. Added a final line. January 3rd, 2026, 03:17 GMT. Signal received. Origin unknown. Interpretation uncertain. But if you're reading this in some distant future, know we heard it. And we tried to understand, even if it was already too late. I saved the file, backed it up on 3 different servers, printed a physical copy and placed it in a sealed envelope with instructions to be opened only when necessary. Then I closed the laptop. At 77 years old, I had spent my entire life chasing a truth the world refused to accept, and now that the world was finally beginning to understand, I realized that maybe the truth wasn't about the Sasquatch. It was about us, about how we're blind to things we don't want to see, about how we ignore signs until it's too late, about how science can document the end of the world, but can't prevent it if nobody listens. The Sasquatch gave us 58 years of warning, 58 years of documented disappearances, 58 years saying, something is wrong, something is changing, it's time to leave. But we didn't leave, because we don't know how. And maybe that's the final tragedy, that the only species intelligent enough to understand the world is ending, is the same species that has nowhere to go. Kenji called me again at 7 in the morning. Voice calm, always calm. Helena, the anomalies stopped. What? Since the signal at 0317. No gravitational anomaly in 4 hours, nothing. As if someone had turned it off. I felt my heart race. What does that mean? I don't know. But I'm sending the data now. I opened the file. He was right. Charts from all seismic stations around the world showed the same thing. Flat line. No fluctuation. No pulse. Absolute stability. For the first time in 8 months, Earth was gravitationally stable. Kenji, is it over? Silence. Then, or it just began. I didn't ask what he meant, because I already knew. There are 2 interpretations. First, the dimensional barrier stabilized. Whatever was happening stopped. Earth was spared. Second, the dimensional barrier collapsed completely. There are no more anomalies because there's no more barrier. The dimensions merged, and we simply haven't noticed yet. I don't know which is true, but I look out the window and see Seattle. Normal, real, tangible. And I wonder, was it always like this? Or at some point during the night while we slept, did we slide into another version of Earth, one where Sasquatch never existed, where dimensional portals are impossible, where physics works the way we always thought it should? What if they didn't disappear? What if we disappeared? There's no way to know, because the nature of reality is that it always seems real from inside it. So I continue. Wake up every day, drink coffee, review data, reply to emails from scientists around the world who are still trying to understand what happened. And every night before sleeping, I look out the window at the distant forest and whisper, thank you for trying to warn us. Because in the end, I think that's what they were doing. Not fleeing, warning, showing that when the world changes, you have 2 choices, change with it or be left behind. The Sasquatch chose to change. We chose to stay. And now, whatever world we're in, the original or some dimensional copy of it, we're alone, without witnesses, without guardians, without those who remembered what it was like to live between 2 worlds. Just us, and our science, and our ignorance, and the silence of a forest where nothing disappears anymore because there's nowhere left to go. End of transmission. Archive note. This document was recovered from Dr. Helena Frost's servers in March 2026. Attempts to contact her failed. Her Seattle apartment was found empty, but with no signs of struggle or forced departure. Her laptop was open, this file on screen, cursor blinking after the word go. Forensic analysis detected no anomalies. Building security cameras show Dr. Frost entering her apartment at 10:14 p.m. on January 3, 2026. She was never seen leaving. The cameras continued recording. The apartment remained visible, but she simply wasn't there anymore. As if she had slid out of the visible spectrum of reality, like them. Archived by Dr. Kenji Matsuda. Date, March 15, 2026. Status, unsolved classification, redacted. If you read this far, thank you. There are others who need to know. Share this file. Keep the record alive. Because truth doesn't die when those who witness it disappear. It just waits, waiting for someone who's ready to listen.